All right, so let's talk about what is going to continue on with the war. One of the things I think it's important for you to know that I've got this picture of France up there at the top, a little map of France. The Battle of Saratoga is what brought France into the war. Up until that point, there were people over in France, American people had been sent to France in order to try to get them to help. Because France and England were natural enemies, they have been for years, generations, centuries. Um, and so our country, when it was formed, they sent people to France. Franklin, Benjamin Franklin, was over in France trying to enlist the help of the French. But France was reluctant because they didn't want to side with a loser. And everyone expected the United States to lose, obviously. But with the Battle of Saratoga, like I said, it was a turning point because with the winning of that battle, people began to see that actually the colonists, the new baby country, might win in this with just a little help. And so that brought in help from France, and then also the French people convinced Spain to help out as well. So, like my second bullet point here says, France had been supporting Americans secretly, like giving them money and maybe some help under the table for a while. But after the Battle of Saratoga, they began sending money, equipment, troops, and most importantly, the thing that America does not have any of, a navy. We had no ships. I mean, the only ships we had were, you know, trading ships. We didn't have anything with cannons on them. And so that was really important that we had that. Now, Spain also decided to help out, which was important. We don't talk as much about Spanish help, but it was important, especially along the Gulf coastal area. The Spanish drove the British out along the Gulf coastal area, which was important because, again, that is a place where we can send ships in and out and trade. All right, the winter at Valley Forge. This is a very famous time for Washington and his troops, where it was just horrendous. I'm going to try to show some video clips in class, a dramatization made by the History Channel, but it's very, very well done. So while Howe was wintering over in Philadelphia, now this is down the road a bit in time, we're talking 1778, 79, the war's been going on for a couple of years. Washington set up camp at a place called Valley Forge, Pennsylvania. It's out in the countryside. His troops are not ready for the winter. They don't have winter clothing. They don't have a food supply. You know, it's fine you say you can shoot animals, but it's bitter cold winter. There's not that many animals out and about, and they haven't stored up any food. Many of his men died or froze to death or died of disease. And some interesting things happened during this winter. Like I said, I don't want to go into all of it here, but interesting things happening medically, discoveries made and things like that during this time at Valley Forge. A couple people that are important as far as foreign help. Marquis de Lafayette from France came over to volunteer in June of 1777. And I've got here that he was a true believer. And by that, I mean that he was of noble heritage in France. He did not have to come here. He had plenty of money, and he had an easy life over in France. But he believes in the cause of independence. And in fact, he's going to go back eventually to France and sort of push the cause of throwing off the king in France during the French Revolution. He ends up in jail eventually. But he's a true believer, and he's just a young guy. He comes over as just a late teenage young man. He and Washington become very good friends during the time, and Washington becomes like a father figure. And of course, Washington loves Lafayette because Lafayette will spend his money. He spends his own money to equip his own unit. Like if Washington will assign him some guys, he will spend the money to give those men the food and the clothing and whatever it is they need to be successful. So that's a big deal because we don't have a lot of money. And that's a problem for us. So that's important to Washington. And Lafayette just adored Washington. When Washington died and was buried, Lafayette made the trip back across the Atlantic to come and be part of a ceremony later on honoring Washington. He was important to him. All right. There's a couple of Polish people. These people are not tested. I'm just throwing these names in there because they mention them in the book, and I think it might be worth knowing that there's people from around the world that came to help out. Kosciuszko and Pulaski came to help American patriots. the one of them died during the war, but this other guy from Germany, Friedrich von Steuben, came and he turns those men during the Winter of Valley Forge from people who were dying and suffering, not that they didn't continue to die and suffer, but the ones who survived, he turns them into a fighting force because he brings military discipline to that unit and makes a huge difference in the whole outlook of the men who were there, made a big difference to them. All right, so what about people staying behind? What was life like for those people? It's not everybody's off fighting, for sure, and there's people left behind. The country has no way to raise money. There's no such thing as taxing. There's no way to pay the soldiers, buy weapons, or build a navy. So, like I said, they needed the French Navy. And if somebody could afford to buy weapons and outfit a group of soldiers like Lafayette could, they were more than welcome. Congress could get money from some states, but the states had to be willing to fork it over. And some states simply were not willing to fork it over. And they would take loans from the states and other countries. But eventually those loans are going to have to be paid back. And that does not work out well, as you're going to see when the brand new country is, when we get our independence and we're forming a new country, we owe a lot of money and we don't have a way to pay it back. This guy down at the bottom, Haym Salomon, there's a picture of him. You need to write his name down because he's important. First, because he was a Jewish American, and because there's not that many of Jewish Americans in history that are important like he is. But he lent large, huge sums of money to help pay for the war, and really, he was not really hot to have it paid back. I mean, he thought, well, if I get paid back, good. But he really believed so strongly in the cause of independence that it was more about just helping out to become independent than anything else. So his name is important because he was, he didn't go out and fight on the front, but he contributed nonetheless to the success of the revolution. Okay, time for a small economics lesson. I try to throw this in when I can. All right. To meet the need for money, Congress printed millions of dollars. Now, by our standards today, that would be billions of dollars of paper money. The paper money was worthless because there's no gold or silver backing it. Remember, back in those days, almost all transactions were made, not all, but an awful lot of transactions were made with using gold and silver coins, or simply just trading, bartering. And so if you don't have a solid banking system, like over in England and France and places that were established for hundreds of years, they have a solid banking system where you have actual gold in a bank and then you can issue paper money. But over here in the colonies, we don't have that so much. But now, in their infinite wisdom, Congress thought if they just print a bunch of money, millions of dollars worth of money, they can just hand it out and that's going to work out well for them. Well, it does not work out well. It never works out well. This causes something called inflation. I've got a little inflation rat down there in the corner because it doesn't ever work out well. What that causes is that it takes more and more money to buy the same thing. So in other words, pretend a loaf of bread costs a quarter. Well, then pretty soon a loaf of bread costs 2 quarters. And then pretty soon it costs $1. And pretty soon no one can afford the loaf of bread anymore. That's what inflation is. So in other words, the price of things goes up, but you don't get a raise in your salary, and there's no gold or silver to back it up, and it always ends out bad. It's not a thing to do. We'll come back to it later because it happens quite a few other times. All right, so there's some new ways of thinking. Abigail Adams, John Adams' wife, and we'll come back to her later, she's really ahead of her time on many, many things. One of these was that women should have a voice in government. Some women actually, and she was one of them, questioned slavery. Abigail and John Adams were very much anti-slavery from the beginning, very much against it. A lot of New Englanders were. They feel like it's immoral. It runs counter to the Declaration. Okay, it says in the Declaration, all men are created equal. Well, if you own slaves, that's not having them created equal. So Abigail and John, Abigail specifically, but John also, see very early on that this is completely contrary to whatever we were supposed to be thinking in the Declaration. All right, let's understand that there are loyalists. Loyalists live in the country, like I showed you the pie chart, like I've talked to you a million times. Not everybody is ready for a revolution, and even during the war, not everybody is siding with the rebels. Those who are loyal to the king, they're going to fight with the British, and they did. And some acted as spies. Now, a lot of times the colonists, the rebels, they know who these people are. I mean, because they've been living with them. They live among them. They know that they've never been on the side of it's just like, who's voting for Trump and who's voting for Clinton. You know who these people are. They're not being shy about it. A lot of these people either flee to Britain or to Canada, though, because they're afraid, and there's good reason to be afraid. Because often these people are then shunned, looked down upon, like, okay, don't come to our church anymore, don't be around us anymore. Sometimes the state, your Massachusetts, your New York, your Pennsylvania, not Pennsylvania so much, but some of the other states that were more really, really pro-revolution would simply confiscate your business. They'd take it away from you or your property because you're a loyalist. I'm taking it away from you. And so it's not a good thing. And so a lot of them, they see this maybe happen to their neighbor or their friend who's a loyalist, and they're like, okay, we're out of here. I'm just selling this stuff and getting out to where I'm going to be treated better. So a lot of them, not all, but quite a few left because they could see the writing on the wall.